Nikos Kazantzakis almost died twice. You might know him as the writer of the books Zorba the Greek and The Last Temptation of Christ and some others, but you probably don't know that he almost died twice. The first was during the occupation of Athens by the Nazis. Food was scarce, systems were broken, suspicion was on the rise, the Greeks were starving, and he tells it like this. I was on a small island near Athens, and so the Germans took everything. We had nothing to eat, and I was almost dying of hunger. And everyone around me was dying, so one day I received a letter from a Franciscan friar who lived in Athens. He told me, if you would translate St. Francis of Assisi's biography, then we will send you a case of provisions. So right away, I received it. It was a case that had marvelous things, almost unheard of, and I had forgotten them. Sugar and coffee and macaroni and rice. And I wrote this book with a long prologue. And the second time Nikos Kazantzakis almost died was from a fever. He says, at that moment, all of a sudden, I thought about St. Francis of Assisi. I wanted to think about a man who was able to conquer death. And right away, I thought about St. Francis of Assisi. And while I had a fever, 104, 105, I don't know how, my wife came to me and I asked, take this pen and I will dictate. And I started to dictate her the book, St. Francis of Assisi. Poetic things, I told her. Take the pencil and write. I'm going to dictate something that St. Francis didn't say, but that he could have. One day, St. Francis saw an almond tree in the middle of winter. So St. Francis told him, Brother Almond Tree, talk to me of God. And all of a sudden, the almond tree became covered with flowers. Kazantzakis says, that's very Franciscan, isn't it? Why am I telling you about Nikos Kazantzakis and his rambling, fever-induced dictation of a book you didn't read about a Catholic in an Advent sermon in a Unitarian church? It's a backwards way into a story about an almond tree blooming in the winter. In the book, the narrator is Francis's loyal colleague and friend, Brother Leo. It's about Francis's clash with family and social status quo, the breathtaking Italian countryside, Rome, the Holy Land, a return to homeland, divine poverty, the struggle with self and human weakness, a love for nature and transformation. It's a book you should read, called St. Francis. It's subtitled God's Pauper, and is more than a story of St. Francis of Assisi, the young Lord who, in a magnificent gesture, gave away all his wealth to the poor. How did his friends react, you ask? Those friends who were, when he was wealthy Lord, begging for his friendship, and after he renounces, like the Buddha, the world of wealth and power, casts off the luxury and splendor of life and takes up sackcloth robes and talks to almond trees and blesses pigs and pigeons, they chased him out of Assisi, hurling rocks and insults at him. The book is full of love for humanity and for all God's creatures, sparrows and snakes and lions and ants alike. Kazantzakis traveled himself to Umbria in Italy to walk in the footsteps of St. Francis of Assisi after he penned his fevered first draft of this book, and later said, "The book is for those who are experiencing a harsh winter. It is the book that reveals the power that is deep within each of us and in every creature of the world, regardless how weak or destitute they seem." To get to heaven, Kazantzakis said often, you must gain momentum from the bottom of hell. And so to the story. In this magnificent book, Kazantzakis tells the story of St. Francis standing in front of an almond tree in midwinter, and he asks the tree to tell him of God, and suddenly the tree begins to bloom. In just a few seconds, the almond tree was covered with the beauty of flowers. So what, Daniel? What are you talking about, almond trees in Umbria in the winter when we aren't there? Well, because this is a moment in this book that has been commented on by Buddhas and sages alike. I first heard this story about the almond tree in a study group by my elder ministers in a conference room in Alton, Illinois, and Roy Phillips, the minister of St. Paul, Minnesota, Unitarian Church, exclaiming something about a God he didn't believe in, said, "But what about the almond tree?" and told this story to an amped up macho group of intellectuals who collectively took a breath and smiled. And then the late Vietnamese Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, the closest human being I ever met to someone who I thought was enlightened, says of this story, "When I read this story, I saw that St. Francis stood on the side of the ultimate dimension. It was winter," Thich Nhat Hanh says. "There were no leaves, flowers, or fruit, but he saw flowers." We may feel that we are incapable of touching the ultimate dimension, but that is not correct. We have done so already. The problem is how to do it more deeply and more frequently. When you touch one moment with deep awareness, you touch all moments, he said. If you live in one moment deeply, that moment contains all the past and all the future. The one contains the all, he said. Touching the present moment does not mean getting rid of the past or the future. As you touch the present moment, you realize that the present is made of the past and is creating the future, he said. Touching the present, you touch the past and the future at the same time. You touch globally the infinity of time, the ultimate dimension of reality. When you drink a cup of tea very deeply, you touch the present moment and you touch the whole of time, he said. It is what St. Francis did when he touched the almond tree so profoundly that he could see it flowering even in the middle of winter. He transcended time, said Thich Nhat Hanh. People look east. The earth is bare. One more seed is planted there. Give up your strength, the seed to nourish, that in course the flower may flourish. Sing today, the rose is on the way. When the young woman, Eleanor Fargion, penned this hymn, she is the woman who wrote the hymn you know, Morning Has Broken. She wrote, "The bare earth is waiting for the seed that will flourish in the reign of the promised one." And she and Kazantzakis and Thich Nhat Hanh and me, if I can count myself among them, want to point to the future and the present ultimate reality one more time, because the earth seems so bare when winter arrives, when petulant presidents receive made-up peace awards, or worse, declare Our foreign policy with old allies is dead. The earth seems bare, and all words remind us of something. Kazantzakis on the verge of death, Francis in the snow, the almond tree bursting into blossom, a Buddhist pointing to the future, a girl writing poetry in their own ways or looking at something barren, something lifeless, something winter stripped, and seeing not just what was, but what was on the way. People look east, the time is near, the earth is bare, is a message of hope, not a message of despair. Most of us do not need convincing that the earth feels bare, either because we live in the winter, literally, or because we witness what is happening in society. We know what emptiness looks like out there in the world, and we also know what emptiness looks like in here in the heart. We have stood in our own winters. Some of us are in one right now in this room. And if not, we can name some barren places in our lives, the griefs we carry quietly, the broken systems we witness that harm the vulnerable, the divisions in our country and in our families, the numbness that we feel that comes when life feels too heavy. And this hymn that we've been singing for 2 weeks does not deny the barrenness. It names it honestly. It says, today the earth is bare. There's no pretense. There's no spiritual airbrushing this. Bare is bare. In the winter, the earth is even hard and unbearable. And yet one more seed is planted there, it says. This is the almond tree in winter, the future in the present. This is Francis pointing to what looks like nothing and expecting everything. This is Kantzakis, half starved, half burning with fever, still reaching not only for survival, but for meaning and for poetry and for beauty and for God. And so as we look east toward the one who comes into our winter, the poets help us to see what Francis saw in that almond tree. They help us to learn again, to see in the seemingly bare earth something. As the poets always do, and they did today, they always point trying to get us to see below the surface of our pain and our despair, if not to look at it directly. The two poems that we spoke of today, Liselle Muller's poem, Hope, insist that hope is not fragile, not abstract, not wispy. It is earthy. It is creaturely. It is hidden in plain sight. She writes of hope hovering in dark corners, shaking sleep from its eyes, dropping from mushroom gills. She tells us that hope explodes in the starry heads of dandelions turned sages, clings to the wings of green angels, the seeds that whirl down from maple trees. In other words, hope lives in overlooked places, in the things we call weeds and scraps, in the potato's many-eyed humility, in the earthworm who survives what should have ended them, in the wag of the dog's tail, in the first breath of the newborn child. Muller calls hope the singular gift we cannot destroy in ourselves, the argument that refutes death, the genius that invents the future, all we know of God. She's saying that no matter how hopeless we feel, how tiny the flame of hope gets, it is not gone until life is gone. It is the argument that refutes death, this hope, reminding us that there is more that we cannot yet know. Hope is the longing for what we desire as essential as blood in our bodies, the serum which makes us swear not to betray one another. And then she says something astonishing. it is in this poem trying to speak. Because I think hope is always trying to speak, especially in the winter, even in us. And this too helps us return to Francis, not only Francis and the almond tree, but Francis as remembered in the other poem that TJ read, Galway Kinnell's St. Francis and the Sow, not the Snow. Kinnell tells us the bud stands for all things, even for those that don't flower, because everything flowers from within of self-blessing. But sometimes, he says, a creature forgets its loveliness, becomes crushed by winter, by weariness, by the voices that say nothing is beautiful or will ever grow from you. Sometimes individuals forget this. Sometimes nations forget this. And then Kinnell says it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to put a hand on its brow and say, you are lovely. You can flower again. You are blessed. That is what St. Francis does in this poem. He places his hand on the creased forehead of the sow and blesses her until she remembers down the length of her the long, perfect loveliness. She blooms. She remembers God, the human, ultimate reality of things, the presence of love and hope. That is, friends, what Advent wants to tell us, no matter what anyone says. Advent is a time that is not pretending that the earth is all full of joy. It is a time that reminds us what God has never forgotten, that even the barren earth is beloved earth, that even the winter tree is capable of blossoms, that even sometimes broken, sometimes exhausted, we carry within us a bud waiting to flower. So when our hymn tells us, people look east, the earth is bare, it's not a statement of despair. It's an invitation to look again, to see the hope trying to speak, to see the loveliness that needs to be retaught in us, to see the bud beneath the frost, to give our strength to nourish the seed that does not yet resemble its future flower. And so if you find yourself in a season where the ground feels a little cold, where hope seems a little dormant, where life looks more like winter than like promise, remember Mueller's earthworm and potato, Kinnell's sow rediscovering her blessing, Francis's almond tree bursting into bloom, because God comes to barren places, plants seeds in frozen ground, reteaches creation its loveliness, is in the poem of your life trying to speak. God, the ultimate dimension of reality, is in the Buddhist monk reading a story about a Catholic saint, talking to a tree, looking for God, told in a Unitarian church in the second week of Advent by a minister who is struggling just as much as you are to see hope bloom this year. And still, the rose, the star, love, quiet and hidden, is already stirring and is on the way.